This is the Bizgnus podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
When you hear the following term, what comes to mind? Customer service. Well, if you thought of a miserable experience with a major company, it might be because excellent customer service can really be hard to manage. Management and marketing expert Greg Kihlström says aligning people, processes, and platforms for the best customer service requires meeting 7 major elements. What are they? In this edition of Bizgnus Interviews, Mr. Kihlström outlines those elements. Let's start by having you name 3 American companies that you feel exemplify excellent customer service.
Yeah, sure. So to name 3, there's probably a few more, but I think famous for this is Southwest Airlines, and I know they've had some recent snafus with some travel delays and things like that, but really long-standing. They're certainly one that I would go to. I would also say American Express is one. It's one I certainly am a loyal customer of myself, and I would say Apple is another one.
Now, we have a short list of excellent customer service companies, but I suspect everybody watching and listening could have a list of perhaps dozens, if not hundreds, of horrible service companies. If Apple and American Express and Southwest can get it right so often with so many, why can't every company do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one big thing is the disconnect between saying that you love and value your customers and actually doing it, doing the work. And what this often comes down to is what happens. It's, I always say the test of any relationship, whether it's a personal or a business one, is what happens when things are tough, and when there's a challenge, when there's a problem, or when there's a competing priority. And from a business perspective, you can say we love our customers, the customer's always right, customer's number one. You can put those words on a wall somewhere or on an intranet or Slack or whatever the case may be. But what really matters is when leaders are faced with a set of competing priorities, are they going to value the customer or are they going to value other things? And profits and for-profit companies always need to turn a profit, and it's not that you need to put everything at the expense of the customer, but when you find ways to make a win-win and have customers benefit and the business benefit, that's where you see these organizations where they're making money. They're profitable companies, they're successful, long-standing companies. They've found a way to make customer priority a business priority.
Apple, for example, is wallowing in cash, everybody says, because of perhaps their customer service, and even though their price point is higher than the typical PC.
Yeah. I mean, they've built an experience and they've built a set of products and around design philosophies and customer experience philosophies that they can charge a premium. They're making a lot on their phones and their devices and stuff like that. But myself and many others are willing to pay the premium because of that expectation is consistently met. And so those companies that are struggling to get people to outlay a little bit extra money, they need to look at why is that the case. I mean, consumers are willing to spend more if they know that they're going to receive a great experience in addition to a good product or service.
Let's talk a little bit about your book. And this is your 11th, I think, in which you say, and I had to write this down to make sure I got it straight for the question. You are talking about a one-to-one, customer-first, employee-driven enterprise that includes 7 key elements. What are these 7 key elements?
Yeah, so the book House of the Customer it's really based on, I work with a lot of, I would say, large enterprise organizations on making meaningful change to make them more customer centric and to do what I was saying before, which is to align customer goals and needs with business goals and needs. And what I found in my work is, again, no one disagrees with the premise. I think a good customer experience, like everybody is intellectually on board with that. Nobody's like, no, we shouldn't. But actually doing it takes a lot of work. And by splitting it up into, in this case, 7 parts. So I use a metaphor of a house, and so there's roof and foundation and walls and pillars. And so I do this because what I found is, again, everyone's bought into the premise, but when you start teasing apart these different elements, you start to find, okay, there's some areas where we're already strong as an organization. Let's not focus as much there. Let's focus on the areas where we're weakest. And so, everything from, the roof is the processes and the systems that kind of guide everything and form that cover over everything moving forward. The foundation is the culture of the organization, which is it needs to be agile and nimble, able to change, but it also needs to be customer centric. And then we've got the bookends, or the business goals and the business outcomes, the walls, so to speak. And in the very center are listening, understanding, and serving the customer. And so, how do we do that? And actually, by splitting those 3 components up, we're actually able to see, okay, we have a good picture of our customer, but we're not actually using that picture of the customer to serve them well, or whatever the case may be. Again, by teasing apart these different things, we can start to see where we're strongest and weakest.
When you have been brought into a company to try to get them going down the right path, what's been the toughest thing that you've had to get across to the management?
Yeah, I mean, I think a common way of splitting these, one way of couching it is as it's often a transformation. So, digital transformation or something like that. And I'm often brought in to help enable that, whether it's from strategy to implementation of it, and sometimes all of the above. But what I often find the gap is, so everyone knows that they're investing in a platform, whether it's a new software platform or they're building something or everything like that. A lot of leaders have the misconception that, okay, well, once we implement the software, then everything's going to be smooth and our lives are going to be better and all of those kinds of things. Anyone that's been through this knows that people, a process, and platform, 3 components, the people in the process get the short end of the stick most often. And the people are the internal customers that are actually having to use this. People do not like change, no matter, even if they understand it and are bought into, okay, this is going to be good for me, for customers, for the business, all of that. Even if they see the vision, they still don't like change. Just it's a natural instinct for humans. And so what I often find is it's the middle piece, the process piece, that I'm often most focused on, because if I can, as the leaders really need to inspire their people to understand the change. I will, myself and others will help to make the best platform decision. We evaluate vendors and do all of that work. But in order to connect the people to the platforms, we need to have a way to connect the current way that business is done to the way that business needs to be done in the future, to implement change, incorporate the processes and the platforms, and to really be successful. And so I find a lot of my effort is spent on the process piece.
It must be frustrating sometimes when the leaders of an enterprise just don't seem to get it or don't want to buy in. How do you get around that?
Yeah, I think making it very clear the impacts on their people is one way to do that. And to simply say that, okay, you've got a team, and some of these people have been at this I was working with a Fortune 100 last year, and some of the people had been there for 10 years plus, doing the same thing day in, day out, essentially. I mean, maybe a platform changed, but then it's really just a matter of the buttons are in a different place or something like that. But we were talking about real, full scale change and just a completely different philosophy of the approach. And talking with the leaders and telling them, listen, you have somebody, they're great in their job, but they don't, they're happy. They've figured out over the last 5 to 10 years, they've figured out the absolute best way to do this one thing as well and as successfully as possible. And now you're saying everything that you've been doing is wrong. We're going to do it this other way. We've got to connect the dots. We've got to bring them into the process. And so, I think again, the leaders, they're smart people, and they get the vision and the strategy, but I think they often look like gloss over the details of the employees doing the work aren't just going to buy into a new strategy if they don't really see the value for themselves either.
How would you evaluate a company just by observing it in terms of what its managers are up to? What I'm thinking about is uh, a company where the managers are out on the floor, so to speak, hobnobbing with the employees and the customers versus those who are in the executive suites who have to hobnob with the financiers and Wall Street.
Yeah, I mean, it's, part of this comes down to, what are the priorities for each of those roles? And, to kind of go back to the earlier point, I mean, I do think that prioritization of all is so important, and it says so much what you end up doing, when you do it, why you do it, of course. But I think it's the order of things, and why you're prioritizing one thing over another. And so, those that are closer to the employees, they may have a tendency to prioritize the things that are going to make it easier on the employees, but sometimes selfishly make it easier on them as managers, so those employees aren't complaining or aren't as resistant to change. And of course, those leaders that are in direct line with shareholders and other stakeholders, it's not that everyone has the best intentions. Ideal. I mean, if they don't have good intentions, they don't belong in the org. So assuming everyone has the best of intentions, they are also trying to make their lives and the lives of their peers as easy and as successful as possible. And so, you have these competing priorities. And again, I think that the organizations that are successful find a way to fold in employee experience, customer experience, and let's call it the shareholder experience of profitability.
And thus they are torn asunder, it would seem.
Sometimes.
When we connected for this interview, I fully expected to see you madly typing out your 12th book. How on earth do you have so many books to your credit? When did you start doing this?
Yeah, so I really started. I've written for a bit. Always was writing articles and white papers and stuff. But really, I owned a marketing agency for a number of years. Sold it about 6 years ago, and not having a company to run and payroll and staff and everything like that to manage freed me up a little bit. And so I started focusing on writing books and doing more speaking in addition to my consulting. And now I'm a consultant that works directly or sometimes embedded as part of a team, and I call that my day job. But really, I love to write, because obviously I wouldn't have written so many books if I didn't enjoy it to some degree. But I also use writing as a way to learn and to do research and to talk with other people. And I've got a podcast of my own and talk with plenty of people, really smart people, about all these subjects. And I just feel like it's part of my duty. I learn so much every year about various things. I feel like it's part of my duty to give back and write what I've learned and talk with others and try to get more info about that. And so, yeah, I've just keep writing.
When you were writing this latest book, what was your aha moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think what as a marketer, I deal a lot in the marketing technology space and customer experience space. And we love our acronyms and our buzzwords, as any industry does. But what I started seeing was there was a big disconnect between, there's these big, what I call North Star goals that I think every organization needs to have, but they're not immediately achievable. But so I wanted to write something about that. But then what I started realizing was I need to connect the dots between, okay, when you say something, you mentioned the one-to-one omni-channel personalization. That's a lot of buzzwords, and admittedly so. But I wrote those buzzwords in the book. But to me, it's important that brands understand that they need to get to these goals. But I also felt a need to help them get there and to build a framework to do that. And I've used frameworks very successfully in a number of different ways. And so I thought a good, easy to understand way would be to use this metaphor of a house and say, okay, let's pull it all apart. Let's again set these long-term goals for some, or some are a little further along in those, but let's set these long-term goals. But then let's actually tease it apart and show how we would actually approach each of these elements. So that's really what I wanted to do, and it was based on really on some clients that I worked with over the last year that really I learned a lot, and I had a lot to share from the experience.
Speaking of that, if we can kind of pry into that history a little bit, what did you learn?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things we touched on a little bit is just the importance of emphasizing the process change and in always keeping the people in mind first and foremost when you're talking about big change. I mean, again, I love doing strategy, and I love to talk about those big goals, and leaders love to talk about that stuff too. But actually getting my hands dirty and working side by side with other teams at some of these organizations, so much of it, one tiny part of it was, okay, let me make a PowerPoint that kind of lays out the vision. But the 99.9% of the work is actually, okay, how are we going to implement that over the next 12 to 18 months? What does this mean for every different role in the org? And when you're talking about a global organization with teams that, one department, they might as well be on another planet than the other sometimes. And it takes a lot of coordination, it takes a lot of politics, it takes a lot of subtle things that need to be done, but it all has to work together. And everybody needs to come together, and that's that I wanted to talk about that stuff.
You get that to happen in many a company I can think of, you'd be walking on water as far as managers are concerned. What would you like to add that we haven't had a chance to talk about, Greg?
Yeah, I think we've covered quite a bit. I mean, I definitely I encourage people to pick up the book. I'd love to hear what they think about it. But yeah, I mean, I think in my work, it's really, I think what I've found is that I come from a marketing background, as I mentioned, and what I found and what kind of led me to my approach and where I guide a lot of customers today is marketing is only truly effective when it's authentic and when there's a great experience that backs it up. And to go even deeper than that, customer experience is only sustainable when the employees are motivated and engaged and feel purpose and value in what they do. And so when you think of these, at the bottom foundational level is the employee experience must be great. If that is great, they create a great customer experience, and then you can market and brand and talk about all of these great things, and it's actually authentic and it's true. When you say that a product is great, it actually is great, and your customers then I guess the last key topic within the book is this idea of focus on customer lifetime value instead of a pure focus on net new customer acquisition. And always, marketing, advertising, net new customer acquisition, always going to be important, but we're seeing more and more brands are focusing on customer retention, customer loyalty, and building models to actually figure out, well, what is the lifetime value of a customer? What should it be? And sometimes that's a lot harder than it seems. It seems like it's maybe a couple numbers adding up or something like that. But again, some of the organizations I work with, you would think they would have that number pretty readily at hand, but it takes a lot of data sources across divisions and product teams and countries and all sorts of things to really get that number.
Well, customer retention, another way parallel to that, of course, is employee retention. And every manager knows it's much easier in the long run to retain and develop employees than to be constantly out trying to find new ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I learned the lesson on retention just having to do sales for my my agency and manage a team at the I mean, we were a boutique for 25, 30 people, but still, if you lose a person and a 30-person team, you're down a lot, right? There's a lot of institutional knowledge. So, you extrapolate that to losing dozens, hundreds of people, and all of a sudden, I see all these layoffs happening, and I'm sure some of them are financially necessary, but sometimes it feels like, are they really thinking this through on what they're actually losing? And I've seen some smart companies retain. I talked with an HR leader at Marriott a couple of years ago on my podcast, and during the 2008-2009 financial crisis, they held on to people knowing that they weren't making a lot of money during that time. People weren't traveling like and this was pre-pandemic, but that I talked with them, but they made an investment decision in their own people, because they knew that how hard it is to your point, to find new good people. And so companies that are smart like that, I mean, yes, short-term profits are maybe sacrificed, but long-term loyalty, long-term gains, and the cost of onboarding and all of those kinds of things, it's not just treating people well, it can also be a really smart business decision.
And one last thing we need to get, because I'm sure people would like to get in touch with you. You must have a website, I suspect.
Yeah. So I'd recommend two things to keep in touch. I have a website, gregkihlström.com, where you can access all my books, podcast, blog, all of those kinds of things. And then also I'd recommend reach out to me on LinkedIn. Very active there, and always happy to connect and network there.
You've been watching the Bizgnus podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@bizgnus.com. Thanks for watching.